April 30th, 1945. Northern Germany. The war was ending, but nobody had told them. They were nurses, not soldiers, not civilians anymore. Just uniforms in between. Mud clung to their boots as they stumbled along a road lined with shattered birch trees. 40 of them, unarmed, blood still dried on their sleeves from field wards that no longer existed. Behind them, smoke rose from Lübeck. Ahead, silence. They'd heard the stories. Everyone had. Soviet troops taking revenge in the east. Villages where women disappeared. Barracks where men begged to be shot first. And somewhere between rumor and nightmare, one phrase had taken shape and followed them through every mile. They are going to us. Now, as British trucks idled nearby, that whisper returned. Quiet, ragged, shared between cracked lips. A sergeant barked a command they couldn't understand. They froze. He wasn't shouting in anger, only giving orders to form a line, but every raised voice made their breath hitch. The nurses shuffled closer together, shoulders touching. Fear had made them one body, one heartbeat. Marta Weigand, 23, walked near the front. Her medical satchel was empty except for a small pair of scissors and a patch of gauze. She hadn't spoken in hours. She could still smell ether on her hands, a ghost scent from surgeries she'd performed under artillery fire 2 nights before. Now those hands trembled without a patient to hold. A jeep passed slowly, its wheels hissing through puddles. 2 British soldiers in khaki coats watched them. They didn't look cruel, only tired. But to Marta, their stillness was worse than hostility. The enemy should sneer, shout, mock, not observe with quiet, measured eyes. She thought of the posters pinned to the walls of her training barracks in Hanover. Drawings of Allied soldiers as beasts, slogans promising women would be defiled if captured. The words had burned themselves into her. Now, standing here on this road, they felt less like propaganda and more like prophecy. The convoy halted. A British officer dismounted from the jeep. Tall, middle-aged, his face wind-burned and unreadable. He walked slowly down the column, hands behind his back, boots crunching gravel. Every nurse avoided his gaze. He stopped near Marta's row. Looked over the women. Their coats were too thin for the cold. Some still wore surgical aprons over torn skirts. Blood stains, dried brown. His brow tightened. Not in anger, but something else. Maybe calculation. Maybe pity. He said something to his aide. None of the women caught it. A moment later, a corporal jogged toward the rear camp. They waited. Seconds, maybe minutes. The air smelled of oil and rain. Somewhere, a crow called. "Move!" A guard ordered, waving them forward again. They obeyed instantly. They reached a checkpoint. 2 wooden barriers, sandbags, a field tent, and a kettle of steaming water perched on a metal drum. To their right, rows of German prisoners in grey uniforms stood behind wire. To their left, British cooks ladled soup into tin bowls. The mix of smells, fuel, soup, and mud, made Marta dizzy. The nurses were herded into a clearing. They expected interrogation, maybe separation. They clutched their satchels, their papers, whatever fragments of identity they still had. A young British soldier approached with a clipboard, asking for names. His accent turned their surnames into strange sounds. One of the older nurses whispered, "Don't speak. They'll choose who to take first." Marta hesitated when her turn came. She tried to pronounce her name slowly, Weigand, Marta, but her voice broke halfway. The soldier nodded, scribbled something, and moved on. No reaction. No cruelty. Just order. That calm terrified her more than shouting would have. She glanced sideways at another nurse, Elsa, who mouthed a question. "When?" Marta didn't answer. The officer returned. He gave a curt signal, and men began unloading crates from a truck. The women tensed, expecting restraints, maybe ropes. But the crates clattered open to reveal something else. Coarse, Heavy wool coats. Dark brown, lined with canvas. British issue. The first coat was carried toward the group. The corporal hesitated. He didn't seem sure whether to hand it or throw it. Finally, he stepped forward and offered it directly to the woman nearest him. She didn't move. He frowned, gestured again. "Take it." No one did. He sighed and placed it gently on the ground between them. Then another soldier brought a second coat. And another. Soon the pile grew, steam rising faintly from the wet fabric. The women stared at it as if it were bait. Marta's throat tightened. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her ears. She couldn't understand. Why would they give them coats? Why now? The officer said something in low English, his tone clipped but calm. The corporal repeated it louder. "For cold. Put on." No one moved. A guard stepped closer, lifting one of the coats and holding it open toward Marta. His hands were steady. His expression said nothing. She froze. In that second, every story she'd ever been told fought against what she was seeing. Her training said, "Trap." Her body said, "Cold." Rain began to fall again. Thin, slanted lines cutting through the air. Drops slid down her face. She looked at the coat, the enemy's coat, and finally reached out. Her fingers brushed the wool. It was rough, damp, heavier than anything she'd worn in weeks. The soldier let go. She caught it awkwardly, clutched it to her chest. The officer nodded once. "Good," he said quietly, almost to himself. Marta didn't put it on right away. She just stood there, coat in arms, eyes wide, breath shallow. Around her, other women slowly followed, one by one taking the coats, wrapping themselves in disbelief. No one thanked them. No one smiled. There was no language for it. In the distance, a church bell rang faintly, the sound thin, hollow, as if carried from another world. The officer turned away, speaking into his radio. A cook appeared from the tent with a kettle and several tin mugs. Steam curled upward. The smell of tea drifted across the clearing. The women didn't move toward it. They were still expecting the punishment that must come next, some catch, some reversal. But nothing happened. The guards resumed their posts. Paperwork continued. The routine swallowed the moment. Marta finally pulled the coat around her shoulders. The fabric scratched against her skin, but the warmth spread fast, so sudden it almost hurt. Her eyes burned. She told herself it was the rain. Behind her, someone whispered again, barely audible. "They are going to," then stopped. The sentence no longer fit. For the first time in months, she didn't know what to fear. The convoy stood there, motionless, wrapped in enemy wool, waiting for the next order that didn't come. And as the drizzle thickened into cold mist, Marta looked down at the coat, a coarse, foreign fabric stitched by hands she'd been taught to hate, and felt something inside her unravel quietly. It wasn't mercy yet. It was confusion. But it was the first warmth she'd felt since the war began. By dawn, the rain had stopped, leaving the camp soaked in silence. Canvas roofs sagged under the weight of water. The nurses hadn't slept. They sat upright on straw pallets, coats pulled to their chins, waiting for something. Punishment, interrogation, anything that would make sense of the night. Nothing came. At first light, a British corporal entered, his boots squelching through the mud. "Outside," he ordered, voice clipped but not harsh. The women obeyed immediately. They still believed resistance might cost lives. The air smelled of diesel and wood smoke. Beyond the camp fence, trucks idled, their exhaust curling into the gray sky. Marta stepped into the mud, clutching her coat tighter. Around her, others adjusted their scarves, some still wearing the Red Cross armbands that had marked them as medics. They'd been stripped of weapons, of tools, even of rank, but not of fear. A table had been set under a top. Two clerks sat there with ledgers and papers. Behind them stood a young officer, barely 20, his uniform pressed, face too clean for war. He gestured for the first woman in line. "Name," he said, in slow, careful German. The nurse answered quietly. The clerk wrote it down, misspelling half the letters. The next woman stepped forward. The rhythm was mechanical. Name, date, birthplace, occupation. Each response swallowed by the scratch of pencil on damp paper. When Marta's turn came, she hesitated. "Weigand, Marta," she said. "Field nurse, Hanover." The officer repeated her name softly, almost as if testing it. "Weigand." He nodded once. "Medical personnel. No arms. No charges." He made a check mark and waved her aside. No questions. No accusations. Just procedure. The efficiency unsettled her. Cruelty had shape, rage, noise, punishment. But this was blank, polite, almost bureaucratic. It felt safer and more terrifying at once. They were each handed a small tag with a number printed in black. "Keep this visible," the clerk said. The tag swung from string loops around their wrists, identity reduced to digits. They were led to a larger tent. Inside, British medics unpacked supplies, bandages, soap, enamel bowls. The nurses stopped at the threshold, uncertain. One British sergeant motioned toward the bowls. "Clean. Wash. Soap." No one moved. He repeated himself, slower, louder. "Soap." He mimed washing his hands. The women exchanged looks. The gesture, familiar, even kind, carried a memory none of them could name without shivering. Soap had been the word whispered about the eastern camps. Soap, showers, lies. One nurse backed away, shaking her head. "No, not that." The sergeant frowned, confused. He looked at the medic beside him. "They think it's—" He stopped mid-sentence, lowering his voice. "Bloody hell." He stepped back, removed his gloves, and plunged his own hands into the bowl first. Lathered them slowly. Rinsed. Then gestured again, gently. Only then did Marta step forward. She touched the water, warm, clean, scented faintly with carbolic. Not poison. Not punishment. Just soap. The women followed, one by one. The tent filled with the soft rhythm of washing. Hands rubbing together, water dripping, fear dissolving in cautious silence. Outside, guards kept watch. They didn't leer, didn't joke. They smoked cigarettes and spoke quietly among themselves. To the nurses, it still made no sense. Were these men acting for show? Were cameras watching? Would kindness turn to cruelty once orders changed? In the afternoon, they were given food. Thin soup, barley, small pieces of bread. A British private placed each bowl carefully, as if serving guests. One of the women refused to touch it. "They want to weaken us," she whispered. Marta stared at the steam rising from her bowl. She could smell the vegetables, cabbage, onions, something real. Her stomach twisted. She took a slow sip. The salt burned her throat. Tears filled her eyes. Hunger had made gratitude hurt. A guard noticed. He didn't speak. He simply nodded, then moved on. That evening, as the camp quieted, the women sat under their coats near a brazier. The fire popped softly, casting shadows that danced over their faces. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Elsa broke the silence. "Maybe they'll send us east," she said. "No," another answered. "They'll keep us for labor. Or trade us to the Russians." The speculations spiraled, each darker than the last. Marta listened, but didn't join. Something had shifted inside her, something she didn't trust yet. These British soldiers didn't act like victors seeking revenge. They acted like men following rules. And rules, she realized, could be more merciful than emotion. Later, a soldier approached carrying a crate. "More coats," he said. "Proper issue this time." His accent made the words soft, almost kind. He placed the crate down and walked away. The women stared at it until he disappeared, then opened it slowly. Inside were not just coats, but socks, gloves, scarves. British Army surplus, rough but new. Marta picked up a pair of gloves. The inside still smelled faintly of tobacco. She slipped them on and flexed her fingers. Warmth returned instantly. Elsa whispered, "Why would they give us this?" Marta didn't answer. From a distance came the hum of a generator, the faint crackle of a BBC broadcast. English words none of them could understand filled the air, calm and orderly. The sound felt like another language for peace. Hours passed. The women began to sleep in shifts. Outside, guards rotated quietly. The war's front lines were collapsing. Rumors of Hitler's death drifted between tents, unconfirmed but spreading. When a British corporal passed by the nurse's tent, he paused, looking in. Most of them were asleep, wrapped in wool, their faces pale but peaceful. He murmured to the younger soldier beside him, "Poor devils. Don't even know it's over." The soldier shrugged. They believed what they were told. The corporal sighed. "Didn't we all?" He pulled the flap closed gently and walked on. Inside, Marta stirred awake. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The silence confused her. No shells, no wounded, no screaming. Just the soft breathing of women and the distant crackle of a fire. She touched the coat around her and thought of the man who had worn it before, maybe a British soldier fighting across France or Italy. Someone who had faced men like her brothers. Now she wore his uniform for warmth. The irony made her throat ache. In the corner, one of the older nurses began to weep quietly. No one told her to stop. The sound wasn't loud, just a soft breaking that filled the tent like prayer. Marta wanted to comfort her, but didn't know how. Compassion had been rationed too long. It felt foreign to give or receive. Outside, dawn approached again. A bugle call sounded faintly from another section of camp. A signal for roll call, for order, for the day to begin. The war was ending everywhere except inside them. Marta stood, adjusted her coat, and stepped into the cold morning. Across the compound, a British officer was writing in a ledger. His pen scratched neatly across the page. German female medical personnel, compliant, cooperative, exhausted. Issue winter gear. Awaiting transfer. He signed it, closed the book, and walked away without looking up. To him, it was a report. To them, it was the first proof that mercy had rules. Marta watched as the guards poured hot tea into tin mugs for the men in the next compound. The smell drifted toward her, bitter, earthy. Her stomach growled. She looked down at the coat again. Mud on the hem, seams coarse, label faded. It was not comfort. It was not luxury. But it was survival. And for the first time, she wondered if the enemy's kindness wasn't a trick, but a discipline they'd forgotten to believe in. The wind picked up. Somewhere beyond the camp, a church bell rang again. Faint, hesitant, as if testing the air after years of silence. Marta listened. It sounded like the war was learning how to end. The message reached the camp 3 days later. A runner arrived from the British command post, his boots caked in mud, uniform still damp from rain. He handed a sealed envelope to the senior officer and saluted. The officer broke the wax and read in silence. Then, with a nod that carried more weariness than triumph, he said only 2 words, "It's over." The war was finished. The news spread through the camp not like celebration, but like disbelief. The guards didn't cheer, the prisoners didn't move. For both, the ending felt too fragile, too sudden, as if any sound might shatter it. Marta heard it from a young interpreter who walked tent to tent, repeating in hesitant German, "Der Krieg ist vorbei." The war is over. She stared at him blankly. The words didn't register.
Over?
What did that even mean? After 6 years of blood, hunger, and loss. Over didn't sound like peace. It sounded like emptiness. When she finally understood, her knees gave out. She sat in the mud and laughed once, a short, broken sound that turned into a sob. Around her, other women reacted the same way. Some crying, some staring at the sky, others whispering prayers to mothers long gone. The guards watched quietly, their rifles lowered. For the first time, no one was an enemy. They were just survivors standing on opposite sides of a fence that suddenly meant nothing. That evening, the British command allowed a fire in the main yard. Prisoners and guards alike gathered near it, not together but not apart either, the invisible distance between them smaller now. The flames cast their faces in shades of orange and gold, flickering across expressions too tired to hate. A British officer stepped forward carrying a small box. "Letters," he said, holding it up. "You can write home. One each." The reaction was immediate. Gasps, murmurs, disbelief. "Letters?" The women stared as if he'd offered them sunlight. They hadn't written in years. Most didn't even know if home still existed. The officer laid out paper and pencils on a table. "We'll send them through the Red Cross," he explained. "No propaganda, no politics. Just family." The women hesitated. Elsa clutched Marta's arm. "If I write," she whispered, "and no one answers." "Then at least they'll know you tried," Marta said softly. One by one, they approached the table. The paper trembled in their hands. For women who had dressed wounds under fire, carried dying soldiers through chaos, this was harder. Writing required belief that someone might still care enough to read. Marta sat cross-legged near the fire. Her hands hovered over the page for a long time before she began. "Liebe Mutter," she wrote slowly. The ink bled slightly on the rough paper. "I am alive. I don't know where you are, or if the house in Hanover still stands. The war has ended. I am in British custody, treated well. Please believe that. I am safe." Her handwriting shook, but the words steadied her. She wrote of small things, the soup, the warmth, the quiet nights, because she couldn't yet write about the war. There was no language for that. Around her, the sound of pencils scratching filled the air, soft as rain. Some women wept openly while writing, others smiled faintly at the memory of names. A British corporal came by with a tin kettle, pouring tea into cups. "Keep warm," he murmured. The women accepted without looking up, whispering thanks that sounded strange in their mouths. For the guards, the moment was disorienting. They had been trained to keep order, to manage prisoners, not to comfort them. But the war's end had stripped away the script. They were improvising humanity now. Later, after the letters were collected and sealed, the officer placed the box under his arm and promised, "Tomorrow they'll go to Geneva." The women watched him walk away, as if he carried their souls with him. When the fire burned low, Marta remained sitting, staring into the embers. Elsa joined her quietly. "Do you think your mother will read it?" Marta didn't answer right away. "If she's alive, yes. If not," she trailed off, then smiled faintly. "Then maybe someone will read it and know we were not all monsters." Elsa nodded. "They told us the enemy had no mercy," she said. "But maybe mercy was the only thing that survived." A cold wind swept through the camp, lifting ash into the night sky. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang again, clearer this time, as if sure of itself. The next morning, British trucks arrived to transport prisoners. Some were headed to hospitals, others to processing centers for repatriation. The women lined up with their few belongings, a coat, a scarf, a letter-shaped hope tucked close to the heart. Marta's group was among the last to leave. She turned to look at the camp one final time. The fences, the tents, the watchtower now unmanned. It had been a prison, but also the first place she'd seen decency after years of ruin. As she climbed onto the truck, a corporal she recognized approached and handed her a folded envelope. "From the quartermaster," he said. "For the journey." Inside were 2 wool gloves and a small bar of chocolate, a luxury she hadn't seen since 1939. She looked up, eyes wide. "Why?" He hesitated, then smiled slightly. "Because the war's over, miss. Might as well start acting like it." She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So she did both. As the truck rattled out of the camp, the women waved to the guards. The soldiers raised their hands in return, awkward, human gestures that said everything words couldn't. The road wound through fields still scarred by bomb craters. Trees stood leafless, but the sky had softened, the color of pale silver, not smoke. Somewhere, spring was waiting. Marta pressed her forehead to the cold metal side of the truck. The wind stung her cheeks, carrying the faint scent of earth and rain. Freedom didn't feel like joy yet. It felt like exhaustion without fear. Behind her, Elsa hummed softly, a lullaby their mothers had once sung before the war. The melody floated over the engine's rumble, fragile but alive. When they passed a small village, children came running out, waving. Some threw flowers, others just stared, uncertain whether the women in the trucks were villains or victims. Marta met their eyes. For a heartbeat, she wanted to shout, "We were nurses. We saved lives too." But she stayed silent. Perhaps, one day, history would whisper it for her. The convoy reached a crossroads where British flags hung from windows. A signpost read, "To Hamburg." Another pointed east, toward ruins, toward whatever remained of home. The trucks stopped briefly. Marta looked toward the eastern road, heart pounding. Home. Or what was left of it. She closed her eyes, feeling the gloves on her hands, the chocolate in her pocket, the letter she'd written resting near her chest. Symbols of a strange mercy, enemy gifts that no longer felt like betrayal. For the first time since capture, she allowed herself to believe she might return not just alive, but human again. The truck started moving. Dust rose behind it, catching the morning sun. The sound of boots, engines, and quiet prayer filled the air. In that moment, amid broken Europe, ashes and fences fading in the distance, Marta Weigand finally understood. Survival wasn't victory. It was the permission to remember kindness when the world had none left to give. And that, she thought, was how wars truly ended. Not with surrender, but with someone choosing to be gentle when they didn't have to be.